For the record, I actually like the Moon Knight show and think it's one of the better MCU Disney Plus shows we've had in recent years. With that said, however, I think the show still suffers from something that prevents it from being a quote-unquote masterpiece of some sort in my eyes, which really stems from the show's disconnect with the comics / actual Moon Knight source material. I could see many comic Moon Knight enthusiasts and fans alike really having issues with the MCU's interpretation of the Moon Knight character, as it doesn't make much of an effort to stay true to the comics. Now, I know not every piece of comic book adaptations has to be quote-unquote comic accurate, especially in the case of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Not trying to sound like an over pretentious nerd talking about some this isn't like the comics, this is the problem with normies. But I think the issue with Moon Knight comes from certain characters or plot points not being as fleshed out, or having missed opportunities with characters the show could have introduced. So I thought I'd take a look at some of the problems or missed opportunities with Marvel Studios' Moon Knight. One of the first things that comes to mind with some of the comic inaccuracies is the lack of side characters that play a huge role in Moon Knight's mythos and storylines. Characters like Crawley and Jean-Paul Duchamp, nicknamed Frenchie, are reduced to just cool Easter eggs in the series. Frenchie in the comics essentially serves as Mark Spector's companion and pilot. He befriended Mark Spector during his time as a mercenary and became Moon Knight's trusted confidant in his crusade against crime. The character of Frenchie is instrumental in the reality of Moon Knight, and his friendship with Mark is integral to the Moon Knight character. Now imagine knowing all of that just to see him pop up in name only on a phone contact list while watching Moon Knight. I think the real missed opportunity when it comes to the main villain is the absence of Raoul Bushman. Bushman is vital to the origin story of Mark Spector, serving as Moon Knight's arch nemesis and played a huge role in Mark's fate essentially being in the hands of Khonshu. While leading a group of mercenaries to destroy replicants in Sudan, Bushman discovers that an archaeologist named Dr. Peter Ulrain and his daughter Marlene discovered an ancient tomb filled with riches. He ends up killing Dr. Ulrain in an effort to steal the gold for himself, but fails to kill his daughter Marlene due to the intervention of one of his own men, that being Mark Spector. Angered by his actions, Bushman mortally wounded Spector and left him to die in the desert, and killed almost everyone at the archaeological site. As he was crawling with barely any life left in him, Spector approached a statue of the Egyptian god of the moon, Khonshu, who agreed to save him if he became his earthly avatar and subordinate. The origin story is present in the continuity of Moon Knight in the MCU, as Mark goes over his origin with Stephen Grant in the second to last episode of the show.
Didn't have a ton of options after that, so I went work for hire for my old CO Bushman. The job was to raid an Egyptian tomb. Bushman changed the plan. Called for no witnesses, and I couldn't live with that.
Even though Bushman was mentioned by name, it still would have been a great opportunity to incorporate the character in a grand way, as he ties heavily into the character origin of Mark Spector becoming Moon Knight. Hopefully, if the show ever gets a second season, he could become the central antagonist. Now, the one side character that gets a decent amount of screen time is Lila El Fuli, who's literally just Marlene Ulrain, who, from the comics, who is Mark Spector's love interest. Lila in the show literally has the same origin story and connection to Mark Spector as Marlene in the comics, with her father being killed by Bushman when Mark was with him, so I'm not too sure why they changed her name entirely, but it's not a big deal. Before Moon Knight's debut in the MCU, that character was strictly known for being a street-level vigilante in the Marvel Universe. Knight would constantly be compared to Batman, as many casual fans or comic fans trying to make the character sound more appealing to casual audiences would deem him as Marvel's Batman or something along those lines. I can see this being the main reason as to why Marvel Studios steered heavily away from any aspects of the character that made him seem more Batman-esque to avoid any obvious comparisons. While I understand the intention, I think this was somewhat of a mistake, as many street-level aspects of the character mixed with his dissociative identity disorder could have made for some really interesting stories. In most iterations, Moon Knight doesn't normally possess any supernatural abilities or enhanced physical features. His combat abilities focus on his training being a mercenary and previously being enlisted in the US Marine Corps. Mark Spector typically wears a lightweight Kevlar body armor with a cape that can extend into a glide mechanic. Moon Knight also carries a variety of gadgets and weapons in his arsenal, including moon darts, a truncheon club, spiked knuckles, a moon copter for transportation, and sometimes even firearms. Now compare that to the TV show, in which Mark Spector can just summon a suit at will with magic, has super strength, invulnerability, a healing factor, can basically fly, I guess, manifest weapons out of his suit, transform into the Mr. Knight persona at will with magic, and sky manipulation. Just to add on top of the list of quote-unquote inaccurate things about Moon Knight, the usage of Mark Spector's multiple personality disorder differs from the source material. Now, this is mainly emphasized on how the show treated the character of Stephen Grant. In the comics, Stephen Grant was a persona manifested by Mark Spector, who was a financier / millionaire businessman with the sole purpose of making careful investments, turning his mercenary profits into a small fortune. This basically served as the quote-unquote playboy millionaire persona of Mark Spector's psyche. In comparison to the MCU, Stephen Grant resides in London and works at a museum in the beginning of the show. None of these differences are necessarily a bad thing, but I'm just explaining the comic personalities to get to the real problems that I have. Jake Lockley is a personality of Mark's that serves as a taxi cab driver who had reached into the depths of the wealthy criminal underworld and developed a network of informants and spies that allowed him to stay one step ahead of his enemies and criminal targets. In the show, Jake Lockley is pretty much a mystery throughout the 6 episodes, as both Mark and Steven would wonder how they were able to perform certain actions, especially when it came to Jake's impulses in defeating Arthur Harrow. We don't see the Jake Lockley personality on screen until the post-credit scene of the season finale, in which he and Khonshu gather Arthur Harrow to kill him in a limo. And now to talk about one of my favorite Moon Knight personas, that being Mr. Knight. Mr. Knight dresses in an all-white suit and serves as a detective who works with the police and designates himself as a concerned citizen. In the show, however, Mr. Knight I feel is used more as a gimmick, and as he's always been more of a serious, violent, sarcastic, more suave, skillful character in the comics, while in the show I feel as if they made him a bit too lighthearted and goofy.
Like a butterfly, sting like a bee. My name's Stephen with a V. What? I did it! You got planted! Let me see that!
But hey, at least my man is still dripped out top to bottom.
I do look sharp, though.
I don't hate or despise this rendition of Mr. Knight, but I do think it's a step down and hope to see maybe some detective skills in a potential second season. One of the few disappointing features of the Moon Knight Disney Plus series is the lack of maturity and violence that was promised by Kevin Feige himself prior to the show's release.
Brutal. It's been fun to work with Disney Plus and see the boundaries shifting on what we're able to do. There are moments in this series when Moon Knight is wailing on another character and it is loud and brutal, and the knee-jerk reaction is, we're gonna pull back on this, right? No, we're not pulling back. There's a tonal shift. This is a different thing. This is Moon Knight.
So that was a fucking lie.
Don't get me wrong, I wasn't expecting full out blood and gore like it's a Deadpool film or something, but anytime there are potential scenes of intense violence, they're pretty much just used as blackouts or cut out entirely. Not to mention, there aren't really a whole ton of action scenes in the series, as there isn't a lot of screen time spent on Mark Spector actually donning the persona of Moon Knight. But with some of the action scenes, I'd say they're cool for the most part, but definitely nothing special compared to the choreography of something like Netflix's Daredevil or something. Many of the action scenes kind of just include a bunch of quick cuts and CGI, but I'm not trying to nitpick or anything. Like I said, I think they're fine. Going back to the whole street level side of the character, it's just kind of funny to me how a huge chunk of the season's finale action scenes culminate with giant kaiju fight between Amit and Khonshu. Like seriously, how has there been no mention of this in other projects? You'd think this would be a talk of the town, at least for a short period. The thing that actually irritates me most about the finale is how they completely skip over Jake Lockley beating the absolute hell out of Arthur Harrow. Like it happens so fast as Moon Knight is struggling a bit and then poof, blackout.
That wasn't you, was it, Stephen? Not a chance, mate.
One superhero trope I can't stand is when the titular character goes through a multitude of challenges and enemies to get to the main villain or antagonist, but decides not to kill that individual for no particular reason.
I have to finish this. If not, I'll never be free.
Mark! You have a choice.
You want them dead? Do it yourself.
That shit stank, don't it?
Normally, I'd be okay with this if Moon Knight had a no-kill rule, but
No, the idiot's back. Wake up, Mark. If he loses the scarab, I'll kill you both.
my guy, you've murdered God knows how many people just to get to this one man. Not to mention that Jake Lockley persona just ends up killing him anyway with a silencer, so it seemed even more redundant at that point. Well, I hope you've enjoyed my rambling about Moon Knight. Like I said earlier, I don't think the show is bad in any way. I actually like it, but some aspects can be a bit frustrating coming from someone familiar with the comic lore, and I would love an announcement of a second season as there are so many things to explore with the Moon Knight character. Who knows, maybe they'll lead to a Midnight Suns team up at some point in the future. I think that'd be really cool. I'd hope to see more of the character in future MCU projects, as he could serve as one of the better Marvel characters put to screen if handled with the proper care.